This is J. Krishnamurti's talk at the United Nations in New York, 1984.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is a particular privilege for me to welcome Krishnaji to the United Nations and to present him to you today, to give a talk on the subject of peace in our time. There are many aspects peculiarly appropriate to this occasion. First, of course, the basic purpose of the United Nations to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war. The fact that this talk is given under the auspices of the Pacem in Terris Society, recalling the famous encyclical Pacem in Terris by Pope Paul VI. And I might, without being considered immodest, remind some of our friends here that it was during the time that Wuthand was Secretary General and I was Chef de Cabinet that we had the privilege of inviting and welcoming Pope Paul VI at the United Nations when he made that ringing declaration, no more war, war no more. And also that we should be meeting in this auditorium, the Dag Hammarskjöld Auditorium, named after the second Secretary General of the United Nations, a man who struggled for peace all his life and who also, as can be seen from his book markings, struggled for his inner peace all his life. In the 18th century, the poet said, "Let observation with extensive view survey mankind from China to Peru." If we undertook such a survey today, what would we find? As Krishnaji was reminding us in the two talks he gave at the Felt Forum on Saturday and Sunday last, we will find there is no peace anywhere. This organization, which is designed to keep the peace, it has never been allowed to do that. It has been given the privilege, when peace has been broken, if I might say so, of picking up the pieces. There is division everywhere. Division based on nationalism, which Krishnaji would choose to call tribalism. Division based on ideology, east and west, north and south. And division based on religion. People of the same faith killing each other because one is a Catholic and the other is a Protestant. That is the kind of world we have. And how can we reach peace in our time? The international approach through the United Nations, through the regional approach, and any number of mechanisms are available for that purpose. Through a bilateral approach, how many successes can you point out in regard to the bilateral approach? Or at the individual level. It seems to me that a meaningful approach at this time is probably best sought at the individual level. During his two illuminating talks at the Felt Forum on Saturday and Sunday, Krishnaji spoke on the subject of the art of living. If we were to practice that difficult art on the lines he has suggested, and I am sure he will suggest today, peace in our time may not be a distant goal, but a reality within our reach. Let us not forget the words in the Charter of UNESCO, which are not less true because they have been repeated so often. Since wars begin in the minds of men, it is in the minds of men that the defenses of peace must be constructed. Dear friends, I have said enough, perhaps I have said too much. It's my pleasure to you, my privilege to present to you Krishnaji. Please don't applaud. Krishnaji.
Do I stand or sit? Good. I speak for 45 minutes, isn't it?
Fine.
And then question and answer. Probably organization. Probably since the beginning of man, human beings have had no peace at all. And there have been a great many organizations, including this organization, to bring about peace in the world, pacem in terris. But there have been no peace for various obvious reasons. Nationalism, which is glorified tribalism, various opposing religions, divisions of classes, races, and so on. There have been divisions on the earth from the beginning of time. The family, the community, bigger community, the nation, and so on. And also, from what one observes, religion has been one of the causes of wars. You can see the Israelis and the Arabs, the Hindus and the Muslims, the Americans and the Russians, ideas against ideas, ideologies, opposing ideologies, the communist ideology and the so-called democratic ideologies. Why is it, after all these millennia, why is it that human beings throughout the world don't live in peace? Why is it our society in which we live, whether it is in American society or the European or Indian or Japanese, that society has not given us peace either. That society, the culture, the tradition, is created by all human beings. We have created this society. We are responsible for this society, which is corrupt, immoral, violent, divisive, cruel, and so on. We have created this society in which we live. We are the society. Please, the speaker is not a communist in the orthodox sense of that word. We are what we have made of the society. So we are society. That is a fact, not an exotic or stupid, irrational thought. We are society. Each one of us have made this terrible, confusing, contradictory, brutal society. And until human beings, each one of us, radically transforms himself, we'll have perpetual wars. There'll be no peace on earth. Religions have talked about it endlessly. The popes, the priests, local parish clergymen have talked about peace. This institution, with all its power, with its possession, with international grasp, this institution has not brought about peace either. Forgive me for saying this, if you don't mind. And will institutions foundations, will they ever bring peace on earth? Or it doesn't lie in that field at all. Organizations or institutions, propaganda, and all the rest of it. Or do we realize, each one of us, I'm asking this most respectfully, do we realize that we are responsible for this? Not intellectually or verbally, or just accepting it here, but we are responsible for this horror that's going on in the world. Every form of violence, terrorism, wars, we are responsible for it. War is not in Beirut. It's in our hearts and minds. This has been said so often, one is rather bored by all that. And we, human beings, seem to be incapable of living peacefully in our relationship with each other, living peacefully without any dogmatism, ideals, concepts. Because beliefs, faith, conclusions, ideals have separated man. And man apparently has not been able to live without any of those bondages. Man is conditioned. Human beings right throughout the world are conditioned. Their brains have been molded according to a particular tradition, various forms of superstitions called religion. And is it possible for human beings, wherever they live, to be free of that their conditioning? The conditioning as an American, as a European, Hindu, and so on. Is it possible for us, who are so advanced in technology, is it possible for us to radically, fundamentally bring about psychological change? This is really a very, very serious question. This is what the biologists, biotechnologists are trying to do. Trying to bring about a radical change in the very brain cells themselves, so that human beings can live peacefully, not everlastingly fight each other. So, facing all this, not abstractly, as a human being, what is he to do? Actually, form another group, another religion, another institution, or as a human being become aware of his conditioning, be concerned with his conditioning, and free the brain from that conditioning. Otherwise, we are going to have perpetual wars. There will be no peace on earth. In spite of all the religions, in spite of every institution. It must begin with us, not with somebody else out there. So is it possible to bring about a mutation in the very brain cells themselves? Why are human beings so conditioned? Germans, French, Russians, Italians, British, Americans, Hindus, and so on. Why? Is it because we want security, both external and inward? Is there such security inward, psychologically, to be safe? Is there such security? Or psychological security is an illusion? We can go into all this in detail, but our time is very, very limited. So is there psychological security, either in the family, in a group, in a community, in a nation, and internationalism and all that business? Is there any kind of security inwardly? And that is, if we are not sure about that, certain, clear, we try to seek security outwardly, externally, through nations, through religious organizations, through some ideologies. So it's very important, it seems to one, that we should talk over together now and discover for ourselves if there is an inner security. Security in our relationships with each other, however intimate it may be, between man and woman. Security in community, and so on. Is there security in our relationship with each other, man and woman, wife and husband? If there is security, why is there such contention between man and woman, wife and husband? Such conflict in their relationship. Each one pursuing his own ambitions, his own fulfillment, his own desires, and so on. Is it not important to find out for ourselves if there is such security in relationship? If there is such security in this, then that security is the beginning of peace. If there is no security, in our relationship with each other. That's the beginning of conflict, war. So we ought to really, seriously inquire into this question. That is, become aware, conscious of our relationship with each other. Because to go very far, we must begin very near. And the nearest is man and woman, wife and husband. In that relationship, there is conflict, as there is now. Then that conflict is spread, ultimately war. We have never given thought to this. That as our house is burning, which is society is burning, declining, degenerating, are we also degenerating? To slip down, implies our whole life is a routine. Our whole life is a series of battles, struggles, conflicts. If we don't alter there, how can you bring about peace on earth? It seems so logical, so rational, sane. But we don't do that. So could we, as human beings, not as Americans and all the rest of that business, could we as human beings become aware, pay attention to our intimate relationship? Because unless the psychological world is quiet, sane, peaceful, that psychological state will always overcome every kind of organization, whether it be communist organization, totalitarian, or so-called democratic organization. The psyche is far more important than the external legislation, governments, and so on. I wonder if one realizes all this. Do we, sitting here, so-called peacefully, realize our responsibility as human beings? The wars that are going on in the world is our war. Because our consciousness, if I can go into all this much more deeply, our human consciousness, which is made up of biological reactions, fears, hurts, pleasure, beliefs, dogmas, rituals, and endless suffering. That's the content of our consciousness. If you observe this closely, it's a fact that every human being throughout the world shares this. Every human being suffers. Every human being has fear, pleasure, sense of loneliness, despair, anxiety, confusion. Every human being, whether they live in Far East or here or in Russia or in other places. We have been brought up, educated to consider ourselves as individuals. Is that so? Is that a fact? Because we share the consciousness of humanity, because we all suffer. We all go through great agonies, boredom, every form of uncertainty. You may have great talents, great capacities, but behind those capacities lies the ordinary daily consciousness of all humanity. So each one is humanity, not separate individual. You know, you will not accept this because you have been conditioned from the beginning by religions, by society, by culture, that each one is separate individual, separate soul. And therefore he must seek his own salvation, his own expression, his own fulfillment. And this so-called separate individuality is creating havoc in the world, which does not mean that we all become the same automatic, turned out in the same mold. On the contrary, freedom is the highest form of existence. It's the greatest art to live freely. But we are not free. One thinks one is free to do what one likes. Especially in this country, each individual thinks he's supreme to do what he wants. His own fulfillment, the expression of his own desires, and so on. But if you examine closely and seriously, we share the consciousness of the entire humanity. Because this is a fact. Individuality may be an illusion. And to that illusion we are committed. But when you travel around, observe very closely, every human being, whether he has great position, great deal of money, status, power, he is like the rest of the world psychologically. He goes through great pain, desperate loneliness, and all the rest of the psychological world of uncertainty, confusion. And we are the rest of humanity. We're not Africans and Europeans and all that nonsense. We are humanity. Unless we realize that one major fact in our life, we are the rest of humanity. Black, white, or purple, or whatever color they be. Psychologically, we are one. Unless human beings deeply realize that, we are going to have wars. We're going to be eternally in conflict, as we are now. And no organization in the world is going to change that fact. We've had religions all over, various types of religion. Catholic, the Protestant, and the division in Protestantism. There have been religions of various types in Asia, all invented by thought. And thought has made man separate. Because thought is the result of experience, knowledge, memory, and so thought is always limited. It's never complete. It can never be complete. Because it's based on knowledge. And knowledge is always finite, limited. It can expand. It can change, but it's still within the field of knowledge. And knowledge is always limited. And we try to change the world through our knowledge. And this experiment to change the world through knowledge has never succeeded. So, what is a human being to do if you are serious, concerned with the world, with your own life? What is a human being to do? Form innumerable organizations? With their bosses, with their secretaries and so on? Or each one of us is responsible. Because we have created this society. We are responsible for every kind of war. So is it possible? Not merely intellectually, but actually, in our daily life, radically change, bring about a deep mutation. Unless we are capable of doing that, we are going to have perpetual wars. No organization in the world has prevented any wars. For the last historical process, there have been practically wars every year for the last 5,000-6,000 years. All over the world. And man has been responsible. for this war. You may not have a war in America, in this part of the world, but you have wars in other parts of the world. Because we are divided as Americans and Russians and English and French and all the rest of it. Not only nationally, but religiously. Christians, Buddhists, Hindus. So this constant division, both outwardly and inwardly, is bringing about great conflict. We are one human being, not separate. We don't seem to realize that. You suffer, you go through great anxieties, uncertainties, but so does every other human being in the world. And we haven't been able to solve that basic issues. Whether we can live with ourselves peacefully. Peace doesn't begin on the other side of the world. Whether we live peacefully. Without conflict. And I think this is a very important question, which we must put to ourselves. Why is it that human beings who have lived on this earth perhaps 50,000 years, we have done extraordinary things technologically. We have done practically nothing in our relationship with each other. We are perpetually in conflict with each other, man and woman. And that this conflict is extended into war. So, we're asking the most fundamental question. Why do human beings who have lived on this earth for so many millennia, who have done extraordinary things technologically, who have brought about good health for people, who have done most incredible things externally, but inwardly we are savages. Forgive me the use of that word. We are fighting each other. Even in our most intimate relationships. So how can one have external peace in the world, pacem in terris, if one is not peaceful in oneself? We never answer that question. We're always trying to bring changes in the outer. But we never ask of ourselves why we live this way, perpetually in conflict. Fairly obvious when you ask that question, seriously, not casually. We never spend a day trying to find out why we live this way. a vast network of escapes from this basic fact. And we're still going on. We never seem to realize, unless each one of us fundamentally changes radically, there'll be no peace on earth as long as you're an American and a Russian, different ideologies, different concepts, different gods, and so on, will never have peace on this earth. So it behoves us, and each one of us, to find out why we live this way, and whether it's possible radically to change our whole psyche. If there is not a revolution there, mere outward revolutions have very little meaning. We've had communist revolution, French revolution, other forms of revolution throughout the world, and we remain what we are. Self-centered, cruel, all the rest of it. I've finished that.
Questions are fundamental.
Yes, sir. Ask any kind of question.
Krishna, you will be glad to answer any questions that you might have. Please represent to him.
I have a question. You have given us a bleak and pessimistic picture of the world in which we live and of ourselves. Do you see any positive signs around? If you look around in this present world, do you see any positive development, something which gives you any hope? Not something inside us and hidden, but something visible for all.
I don't know why you say, sir. You've only presented a negative side. What is actually going on throughout the world is a very positive thing. You may regard it as negative, but the conflicts, the wars, the brutalities, and all those kind of things are going on. And you ask, what is the positive response to all this? Who has created all this? This mess in the world, this terrible killing, war after war. Who has been responsible for all this? Aren't we each of us responsible? As long as we are nationalistic, as long as we are concerned with our own fulfillments, of our own desires, aren't we responsible for all this mess that's going on? Or is it merely in Beirut that's going on, not here? We've had 2 terrible wars, and we are preparing for other wars. Unless human beings, you and I, radically change fundamentally, we're going to have wars all the time. So your question, sir, is, if I've understood it correctly, what is a human being to do? Right, sir?
No. I asked whether you see anything positive
Yes.
If something positive is going on, not just what we have to do, but if you see signs that something right is being done.
Yes, sir. Something positive. I don't know what you mean by that word positive. I'm not dodging the question. I'm not evading it. But I would like to know if you kindly explain what you mean by the positive.
Well, let's assume you see some people or even groups, even I think you don't believe very much in groups, who are doing something which goes in the direction of this inner change that you deem necessary to bring peace in the world.
Yes, sir. There are several organizations that talk about peace in the world. Various groups that are talking about peace in the world, pacem in terris. The Pope says it. Other religious organizations assert it. We must have peace on earth. And you're asking, if I understand rightly, are there individuals, groups, organizations that are working for it, right? And that organizations, groups, people working for it may be considered positive action. I question that. Where does peace begin? In your heart, in your mind, or in organizations? Where is there man can live peacefully, not going to sleep like a vegetable, peacefully. Peace, to live peacefully demands tremendous intelligence in our daily life. And can organizations help each one of us to live peacefully? Or it must begin with us, each one of us. Yes, sir.
Sir, how to go about this attainment of the psychological security within ourselves?
Vipan, sir?
How to go about the attainment of this internal security, psychological security within ourselves?
It's not an
I'm
opinion.
just a common man, without having been exposed to all these things, in spiritual things. But I would wish to know how exactly to go about the basic transformation which you are hinting at, to the peace, attainment of peace within.
So every religion has talked about it, right, sir? Books have been written about it. Believe in God, you'll have peace. Follow this path, you will have peace. Follow this guru, you will have peace. Follow this particular doctrine, and so on. Mankind has done all this. Various forms, be a Christian, be all the rest of it. Man has not found peace. So, you're asking, if I understand rightly, how is one, a human being, to live psychologically, inwardly, peacefully? So that requires, not that the speaker is avoiding the question, that requires a great deal of inquiry, not just a few phrases. First of all, why are we in conflict? Not only in ourselves, but externally. Why are we in conflict? Is it because there is this dualistic existence, the outer and the inner? Is there in each one of us opposing desires, opposing ideals, opposing sensations, opposing pursuits? Is conflict brought about by thought? It requires, I don't know if we have time to go into all this. What is conflict? Why do we have conflict psychologically? Is it brought about by contradictory desires? This whole concept of individuality is that the basic cause of conflict? I must fulfill, I must do what I want to do. I'm not advocating or suggesting that we all become communists. They have their own problems, their own misery, confusion, their own appalling, etc. I won't go into all that. You know all about it. So why is there in the very psyche, in the very structure of our thinking, conflict? Can human beings live without conflict? And there are those who say conflict is necessary to evolve. And we have had conflict for 50,000 years as human beings. Have we evolved tremendously? Perhaps externally we have, but inwardly we are pretty poor specimens. So one has to become aware of what we are, of what each one of us is. Aware. To be aware choicelessly. If we want to go into all that, which is very complex, to live a life without analysis, but pure observation, without the observer, leads to all kinds of issues which we have time to go into. Yes, sir?
I'm a member of the Religious Society of Friends of Quakers, and we believe, like you, that we must start with inner peace. But we don't feel that, but we also feel that our inner peace should affect what we do outwardly, that we should also be concerned with, say, reconciliation between warring peoples. But from our point of peace within, why should there be a conflict between the inner and the outer peace?
Yes, sir. Why is there conflict between the inner peace and the outer peace? Is that right, sir? Mm-hmm. Am I putting it right?
Well, or why, if we are trying to attain inner peace, why can't we also, through that inner peace, try to bring about outer peace in the world too?
Are we seeking a psychological state where there is no conflict? Are we really seeking it? If we are seeking it, where must it begin? Mustn't it begin in our relationship? Without relationship, you cannot exist. So our relationship is the most important thing. If there, in that relationship, there is no peace, externally we'll project that conflict externally. This is an obvious fact. If each one of us really, basically, lived with complete peace, pacham, then would we not create a world which is peaceful? We know personally a great deal of poverty. We've been brought up in it. Whole of India, multiplying 15 million people every year. Great deal of poverty. How do we change that? Obviously, from what one observes, as long as there is the economy based on one particular community, nation, it's a global problem, not nationalistic or any particular organization. It's a global problem of poverty. Unless we attack that, sir, I don't see how we're going to change the world. Poverty and overpopulation. Europe population is decreasing, and in Asia it's increasing at an appalling rate. And governments are unable to stop that. Their own local governments. They have been talking about birth control, family, and all the rest of it, but it's having very little effect in India. So isn't it, sirs? The economic problem is a global problem, not of any particular group or any particular nation. Unless we have that global feeling for humanity, we're going to continue for centuries, though this particular organization may be helpful. We're going to have poverty always.
Sir. Excuse me, but I don't want to study from the sea. I do feel very secure.
Would you like to come and sit here, sir? I would be delighted somebody to share the platform.
I'll be glad to come.
Come and sit down, sir.
I have been reporting this organization as a correspondent, unhappily an American correspondent, for 38 years. And during that time, I've heard much about you. There is a great challenge to this organization now. Happily, only by ignorant people. Hopefully, I should have said. I went a long way to find out some answers to the questions that came up year after year in a monumental combination of minds from governments, from non-governmental organizations, from scholars, educators like yourself, not too many like yourself.
I'm not educated, sir.
I'm not either.
Thank God.
And as I wandered to find out what I can do to become educated, because education in the slums where I was brought up in New York was a heaven to be devoutly pursued. So I got lost in a book one time on anthropology. And I pursued it further as the colonies were breaking up, and the tribes were breaking up with them, sir. It seems to me that I have made a discovery then, which I'm going to put to you now.
I'm not the Delphic oracle, sir.
You need not apologize, sir. You have a very extraordinary audience here by past experiences. It suddenly occurred to me that the tribal man was peaceful compared to the highly civilized Europeans who made 2 world wars.
Agreed.
And now as I listen to you, I'm beginning to understand why that thought came to me, and that is that in the tribe there is a psychological security. And the individual, being conditioned, as you say, by the society in which he lives, is prone to be a psychologically peaceful man. And that's how he was conquered by other peoples, the civilized peoples, the multilingual peoples. I do not suggest that we can go back to the tribal society, but I'm saying it only because you have deplored, rightly, the situation in which man, after 50 million, or is it 15 million, or who knows, it's enough for him to have learned something, but he didn't.
Yes, sir.
So I want to ask your comment on all I have said, which is quite a challenge, isn't it? May I sit for your answer?
Question being, sir, why hasn't man changed? Why hasn't he learned?
That's right. The eternal question.
Yes, sir. Why has man remained inwardly primitive? Right, sir?
I use the word primitive in a complimentary sense.
Yes. Why? Is it because culturally, socially, we have looked for the outer to change the inner? You understand, the communists have done that. Change the structure, outward structure of society, pass new laws, control thought and so on, and you will then change the inner man. And it hasn't worked out. And shouldn't we, if we are educated, or even primitive in the most politest sense of that word, shouldn't we begin with understanding each one with ourselves what we are? And there radically, fundamentally change. Unless we do that, we're going to end, we'll go on for the next 50,000 years.
You and I won't.
You and I won't, but the common current of consciousness will go on. But if you and another change radically, you affect that consciousness.
I say yes.
Therefore, we must find people, small groups of people, whether in America, in Europe, India, and so, one or two, who are concerned completely with this. inner psychological fundamental change. And I think it's possible.
Of course it is.
Therefore, we are working for it.
Or you wouldn't be sitting here.
Quite.
Excuse me. Sorry.
Thank you, sir.
Dear friends, let me on your behalf thank Krishnaji for being with us this afternoon, and as he always does, for sharing his thoughts with us. And please, no applause. Thank you again.
Very, very